Before starting to listen to this book, please subscribe to our channel to support this channel and give the chance to upload more books for bookworms. Following the captivating journey of James Patterson's First to Die series, we now embark on the thrilling adventure of Book 3. Let's begin. Book 3, Redbeard. Chapter 70. Jill Bernhardt, the tough, savvy assistant district attorney assigned to the bride and groom case, kicked off her Ferragamos and curled her leg up on the leather chair behind her desk. She fixed her sharp blue eyes directly on my face. "Let me get this straight. You think the bride and groom killer is Nick Jenks?" she asked. "I'm sure of it," I said. Jill was dark, disarmingly attractive. Curly jet black hair framed a narrow, oval face. She was an achiever, 34, a rising star in Bennett Sinclair's office. All you needed to know about Jill was that as a third-year prosecutor, it was she who had tried the Lafrade case, when the mayor's old law partner was indicted on a RICO charge for influence peddling. No one, including the DA himself, wanted to submarine his or her career by taking on the powerful fundraiser. Jill nailed him, sent him away for 20 years, got herself promoted to the office next to Big Ben himself. One by one, Raleigh and I laid out Nicholas Jenks's connections to the 3 double murders, the champagne found at the first scene, his involvement in Sparrow Ridge Vineyards, his volatile relationship with the third bride, Kathy Voskuhl. Jill threw back her head and laughed. "You want to bust this guy for messing up someone's life? Be my guest. Go try the examiner. Here, I'm afraid they make us do it with facts," I said. "We have him tied to 3 double murders." Jill, her lips parted into a skeptical smile that read, "Sorry, some other time. The champagne connection might fly if you had him nailed down, which you don't. The real estate partnership's a non-starter. None of it pins him directly to any of the crimes. A guy like Nicholas Jenks, public connected, you don't go around making unsubstantiated accusations." With a sigh, she shifted a tower of briefs aside. "You want to take on the big fish. Guys, go back. Get yourself a stronger rod." My mouth dropped at her hard-edged reaction to our case. "This isn't exactly my first homicide, Jill." Her strong chin was set. "And this isn't exactly my first page 1 case." Then she smiled, softened. "Sorry," she said. It's one of Bennett's favorite expressions. "I must be spending too much time around the sharks. We're talking about a multiple killer," Raleigh said, the frustration mounting in his eyes. Jill had that implacable, prove it to me resistance. I had worked with her on murder cases twice before, knew how tireless and prepared she was when she got to court. Once, she had invited me to go spinning with her during a trial I was a witness at. I gave up in a sweat after 30 grueling minutes. But Jill, pumping without pause, went on at a mad pace for the full 45. 2 years out of Stanford Law, she had married a rising young partner at one of the city's top venture firms, leapfrogged a squadron of career prosecutors to the DA's right hand. In a city of high achievers, Jill was the kind of girl for whom everything clicked. I passed her the security photo from the Hall of Fame, then Nicholas Jenks's photograph. She studied them, shrugged. "You know what an adversarial expert witness would do with these. It's pup shit if the cops in Cleveland feel they can convict with this. Be my guest." "I don't want to lose him to Cleveland," I said. "So come back to me with something I can take to Big Ben." "How about a search and seizure?" Raleigh suggested. "Maybe we can match up the champagne bottle from the first crime scene to the lot he purchased. I could run it by a judge," Jill mused. "There must be someone out there on the bench who thinks Jenks has done enough to bring down the structure of literary form to the point where they'd go for it. But I think you'd be making a mistake." "Why?" "Some 2-time crack whore. Her you can bring in on suspicion. You bring in Nicholas Jenks. You better arraign. You alert him that you're onto him. You'll spend more time fending off his lawyers and the press than making your case. If he's it, you're gonna have one shot, and one shot only to dig up what you need to convict. Right now, You need more. Claire has a hair in her lap from the second killing. The DeGeorges, I said. We can make Jenks give us a sample of his beard. She shook her head. With what you have, his compliance would be totally voluntary. Not to mention, if you're wrong, you might lose. You mean by narrowing the search? I was talking politically. You know the game rules. Fine, say. She riveted those intense blue eyes directly at me. I could envision the headlines, turning the case back against us, like the screw-ups with O.J. Simpson and John Bennett Ramsey. In both cases, it seemed the cops were as much on trial as any possible defendants. Jill got up, smoothed her navy skirt, then leaned on her desk. Look, if the guy's guilty, I'd like to tear him apart as much as you. But all you're bringing me is an unlucky preference in champagne and an eyewitness on her third vodka and tonic. Cleveland's at least got a prior relationship with one of the victims, bringing up a possible motive. But right now none of the jurisdictions have enough to go on. I've got two of the biggest headline grabbers in the city looking over my every move. Jill finally admitted. You think the district attorney and the mayor want to pass this thing on? Then she fixed unflappably on me. What's the litmus test here? You're sure it's him? Lindsay. He was linked to all three cases. The desperate voice of Christine Coggott was clear in my mind. I gave Jill my most convincing nod. He's the killer. She got up and made her way around the desk. With a half smile, she said, I'm gonna make you pay if this blows any chance of getting my memoirs in print by 40. Through the sarcasm, I saw a look flare up in Jill Bernhardt's eyes. The same resolute look I had seen when she was spinning. It hit me like a spray of mace. Okay, Lindsay, let's make this case. I didn't know what made Jill tip. Power, an urge to do right, some manic drive to outperform. Whatever it was, I didn't think it was far from what had always burned through me, but listening to her cogently mapping out what we needed to indict, a tantalizing thought took hold of me. I thought about getting her together with Claire and Cindy. Chapter 71. At an old-fashioned steel desk, in the dingy halls of the Chronicle's basement library, Cindy Thomas scrolled through 4-year-old articles on microfiche. It was late, after 8, working alone in the underbelly of the building. She felt as if she were some isolated Egyptologist scraping the dust off of long-buried hieroglyphic tablets. She now knew why it was referred to as the tombs, but she felt she was onto something. The dust was coming off secrets, and something worthwhile would soon be clear to her. March 1996. The film shot by with indistinguishable speed. Someone famous, the Cleveland bride's friend, had said. Cindy pushed the film onward. This was how stories were earned. Late nights in elbow grease. Earlier, she had called the public relations firm Kathy Coggott had worked for in San Francisco. Bright Star Media. News of their former staffer's death had reached them only that day. Cindy inquired about any feature films Bright Star might have had an association with. She was disappointed when she was told the firm didn't handle films. The Capitol, she was told. The Concert Palace. That was Kathy's account. Undeterred, Cindy plugged Bright Star's name into the Chronicle's databank. Any subjects of articles, names, companies, reviews written in the past 10 years were recorded there. To her mild delight, the search came back with several live responses. It was assiduous work and discouraging. The articles covered a period of more than 5 years that would tie in with the time Kathy was in San Francisco. Each article was on a different microfiche cassette. It required going back into the files, requisitioning 3 items at a time. After 4 sets, the night librarian handed her the clipboard, saying, "Here, Thomas, it's all yours. Knock yourself out." It was 10:15. She hadn't heard a peep from anyone in over 2 hours when she finally came upon something interesting. It was dated February 10, 1995. Arts Today section. For local band Sierra. New film taps into a hit. Cindy's eyes shot down the text, fast-forwarding to anything that stuck out. Plans for their album. An 8-city tour. Quotes from the lead singer. Sierra will perform the song At tomorrow night's bash at the Capitol to kick off release of the film Crosswire. Her heart stood still. She zoomed ahead to the following day's art section. She consumed the article almost in a single suspended breath. Took over the Capitol. Chris Wilcox, the star, was there. A photo with a dishy actress, bright star, other recording stars in attendance. Her eyes traveled over the 3 accompanying news photos. In tiny print, underneath each shot, she noticed a photographer's name. Photography by Sal Esposito, property of the Chronicle. Photography. Cindy jumped out of her seat at the microfiche desk and hurried back through the musty, 10-foot-high stacks of bundled, yellowing editions. On the other side of the tombs was the Chronicle's photography more, rows and rows of unused shots. She had never even been in here, didn't know how it was laid out. Creepy place, especially this late at night. In a flash, she recognized that the aisles were chronological. She followed the signs at the end of each aisle until she found February 1995. She ran her eyes along the outside of the stacked plastic bins dated the 10th. When she spotted it, it was on the highest shelf. Where else? She stepped up on the lower shelf, on her tiptoes, and wiggled the bin down. On the dusty floor, Cindy frantically leafed through folders bunched up in elastic. As if in a dream, she came upon a folder marked in large black letters, Crosswire opening Esposito. This was it. Inside were 4 contact sheets, several black and white glosses. Someone, probably the reporter, had written the names of each person, in pen, at the bottom of each shot. Her eyes froze as she came upon the photo she was hoping for. 4 people toasting the camera, with arms locked. She recognized Kathy Coggott's face from the photos Say had come back with. Red hair, curly, trendy inlaid glasses. And next to her, smiling into the camera, was another face Cindy knew. It took her breath away. Her fingers trembled with the realization that she had deciphered the hieroglyphics at last. It was the trimmed, reddish-colored beard, the narrow, complicit smile as if he knew where all this might one day lead. Next to Kathy Coggott was the novelist Nicholas Jenks. Chapter 72. I was totally surprised when Cindy appeared at my door at 11:30. With a look of wide-eyed elation and pride, she blurted, "I know who Kathy Coggott's lover was." "Nicholas Jenks," I replied. "Come on in, Cindy." "Down, Martha." She was tugging at my giant's nightshirt. "Oh God," she groaned loudly. I was so pumped up, I thought I had found it. She had found it. She had beaten McBride in Seattle, 2 squads of trained investigators as well as the FBI. I looked at her with genuine admiration. How? Too restless to sit. Cindy stalked around my living room as she took me through the steps of her amazing discovery. She unfolded a copy of the news photos showing Jenks and Kathy Coggott at the movie opening. I watched her circle the couch, trying to keep up with herself. Bright star, Sierra, crossed wire. She was hyper. "I am a good reporter, Lindsay," she said. "I know you are." I smiled at her. "You just can't write about it." Cindy stopped, the sudden realization of what she had overlooked hitting her like a pie in the face. "Oh God," she moaned. "That's like being in a shower with Brad Pitt, but you can't touch." She looked at me, half smiling, half like nails were being driven into her heart. "Cindy," I reached out and held her. "You wouldn't have even known to look for him if I hadn't clued you in on Cleveland." I went to the kitchen. "You want some tea?" I called out. She collapsed on the couch and let out another wail. "I want a beer." "No, not beer. Bourbon." I pointed to my small bar near the terrace. In a few moments, we sat down, me with my nocturnal seasonings, Cindy with a stiff glass of wild turkey, Martha comfortable at our feet. "I'm proud of you, Cindy," I told her. "You did crack the name. You spooked 2 police forces. When this is over, I'm gonna make sure you get a special mention in the press." "I am the press," Cindy exclaimed, forcing herself to smile. "And what do you mean? When this is over, you have him?" "Not quite." I shook my head. I explained that everything we had, even stuff she didn't know the vineyard, The champagne was circumstantial. We couldn't even force him to submit a hair. So what do we need to do? Tie Nicholas Jenks solidly into the first crime. Suddenly, she began pleading. I have to run with it, Lindsay. No, I insisted. No one knows. Only Roth and Raleigh, and one more. Who? Cindy blinked. Jill Bernhardt, the assistant district attorney. That office is like a colander trying to sail across the Pacific. It's nothing but leaks. Not Jill, I promised. She won't leak this. How can you be so sure? Because Jill Bernhardt wants to nail this guy as much as we do, I said with conviction. That's all, groaned Cindy. I sipped a soothing mouthful of tea, met her eyes, and because I invited her into our group. Chapter 73. The following day, we met after work for a drink at Susie's. It was Jill's introduction to our group. All day, I couldn't fix on anything other than the thought of confronting Jenks with what we knew and bringing him in. I wanted to accelerate everything a face-to-face confrontation. I wanted to let him know we had him. Gotham Redbeard. As we waited for drinks, I threw out a couple of new developments. A search of Kathy Coblett's home in Seattle had uncovered Jenks's name and phone number in the dead bride's phone book. A trace by Northwest Bell had turned up 3 calls to him in the past month, including one 3 days before the Cleveland wedding. It confirmed what Merrill shortly had told us. Right up to the very end, said Claire. Creepy, both of them. Actually, we had run Jenks's photo by Marion Perkins of Saks as part of a photo spread with 5 others. We desperately needed something that pinned him to the first crime. She paused over his likeness for a few seconds. It's him, she declared. Then she paused. But then, it's hard to tell. It was so quick and far away. The thought of a defense attorney cross-examining her didn't sit well with me. It didn't surprise me that Jill agreed. It took no longer than a single margarita for her to make a seamless entry into our group. Claire had met her a few times when she testified at trials. They had developed a mutual respect for each other's rise through their male-dominated departments. We asked Jill about herself, and she told us she was Stanford Law and her father was a corporate attorney back in Dallas. No interest in the corporate thing. That was for her husband, Steve, who was running a venture fund for Bank America. They lived in Burlingame, affluent. Exclusive took rock climbing treks in the desert at Moab. No kids. It just doesn't fit right now, she said. Jill seemed to live the epitome of the fast, successful life. At the same time, there seemed to be something missing. Maybe she was tired from the grind, the pace of her accomplishments. When our drinks arrived, Claire and I toasted Cindy's ingenuity in coming up with Jenks's name in such short time, and beating 2 police departments to the punch. Claire raised a glass to her. You're pretty good for a rookie, of course, but you're still not the king. She smiled at me. So I'm thinking, Jill said, looking around the table. I know I can hold my own at dinner parties and all, but that's not why you asked me in, is it? Seems like we have all the angles covered here. The press, the force, medical examiner. Just what kind of a group is this? I answered, since it was I who had invited her in. Women climbing the ladder in their careers. Law enforcement. Yeah, with soft, pushover types for bosses. Put in Cindy. Well, I qualify there, said Jill. And it doesn't hurt that each of you seems to have some connection with the bride and groom case. I held my breath. Jill could blow this whole thing if she wanted to, but she was here. We have been sort of working together, I admitted. Outside the investigation, over margaritas, I explained how we had originally gotten together, how we had come upon this case, trying to solve it, sharing what we knew freelance, how it had become a sort of bond, how things had just gotten a bit deeper. Jill arched her eyebrows. I assume you're sharing all this with the investigation. Of course, I insisted. Well, sort of. I told her how we were giving Cindy only what the department was about to release to the press at large, how there was a thrill in cutting through the departments, advancing the case. I know it's a different game when everything starts to get legal, I said. If any of this makes you uncomfortable, We were all sort of hanging there, awaiting her response. Loretta came, and we ordered another round. We were still hanging, waiting on Jill. "How about I let you know when things start to get uncomfortable?" Jill said. She widened her blue eyes. "In the meantime, you're gonna need a lot stronger corroboration if we want to take this thing to court." The three of us breathed a sigh of relief. We tilted our near-empty glasses toward our new member. "So, this outfit have a name?" Jill inquired. We looked around, shrugged, shook our heads. "We're sort of a murder club," I said. "Lindsay's deputized us." Claire grinned. "The Margarita Posse," Jill threw out. "That has possibilities. Badass bitches." Claire giggled. "One day, we're all gonna be running things," Cindy said. "Homicide chicks." She came back with a satisfied grin. "That's who we are. That's what we do." "Just shut me up if I start to roar," said Jill. We looked around the table. We were bright, attractive, take-no-shit women. We were going to run things someday. The waitress brought our drinks. We raised 4 glasses toward one another. To us. Chapter 74. I was driving home, really pleased at having brought Jill into the group. But it didn't take long for the thought to worm its way in that I was still withholding from my friends. My beeper sounded. "What are you doing?" Raleigh asked when I buzzed him back. "I was headed home." "Beat. You up for talking just a little?" "I'm at Mahoney's." Mahoney's was a dark, crowded bar near the hall that was usually thick with off-duty cops. "Already ate," I told him. "Meet me anyway," Raleigh said. "It's about the case." I was only a few minutes away. Mahoney's was on Brannan. To get to Potrero, I had to go right by it. I found myself a little nervous again. I was scared we were no longer playing things by the book. The book was Part 155. Nerds didn't get involved, nor people with their lives ebbing away. I knew that if I let things go, anything could happen. This wasn't some casual fling we could go at for a night and try to rationalize away the next day. As much as I wanted him, I was holding back, scared to let it all come out, of letting myself go, of dragging him in. I was relieved when I saw Raleigh waiting for me outside the bar. He came up to my car. I couldn't help noticing that he looked good as usual. "Thanks for not making me go in," I said. He leaned on the edge of my open window. "I looked into Nicholas Jenks," he said. "And the guy's 48, went to law school but never finished. Started writing novels his first year. Wrote 2 books that didn't go anywhere. Then this twisted thriller, Crossed Wire. Hit. There's something you should know. Maybe 7 years ago, give or take a few, cops were called out to his home in a domestic dispute. Who made the call? His wife. His first wife." Raleigh leaned in closer. I pulled up the report. First on the scene described her as pretty beat up. Bruises up and down her arms. Large bruise on her face. A thought flashed in my head. Meryl shortly. On Kathy's boyfriend. He was into intense sex games. "Did the wife file?" I asked. Chris shook his head. "That's as far as it went. Never pressed charges. Since then, he's cashed in big time. 6 huge bestsellers. Movies, screenplays, new wife. That means there's an old one out there who might be willing to talk." He had a satisfied expression on his face. "So, can I buy you a meal, Lindsay?" A hot bead of sweat burned a slow path down my neck. I didn't know whether to get out or stay in. I thought I got out. "Chris, I already ate. Had a commitment." "Jacoby." He grinned. He could always get me with that smile of his. "Sort of a women's thing, a group of us. We meet once a month. Go over our lives. You know, nanny problems, personal trainers, country homes, affairs, things like that. Anyone I know." Raleigh raised his eyebrows. "Maybe one day I'll introduce you." We sort of hung there, my blood slowly throbbing in my chest. The hair on Raleigh's forearm gently grazed against mine. This was driving me insane. I had to say something. "Why'd you call me out here, Chris?" "Jenks," he replied. "I didn't tell you everything." We ran a firearms check on him with Sacramento. He looked at me with a glint in his eye. "He's got several registered. A Browning .22 caliber hunting rifle, a Renfield 3030, a Remington 40.5. He was leading me on. I knew he had struck pay dirt. There's also Glock Special. Lindsay, 1990 issue, 9mm. A rush of validation shot through my veins. Chris frowned. He has the weapon of choice, Lindsay. We got to find that gun. I made a fist and brought it down against Raleigh's in triumph. My mind was racing. Sparrow Ridge. The phone calls. 1:11 now o'clock special. It was all still circumstantial, but it was falling into place. What are you doing tomorrow, Raleigh? I asked with a smile. Wide open. Why? I think it's time we talked to this guy face to face. Chapter 75. High on the cliffs above the Golden Gate Bridge, 20 El Camino del Mar was a stucco, Spanish-style home with an iron gate guarding the terracotta driveway. Redbeard lived here. Nicholas Jenks. Jenks's home was low, stately, surrounded by decoratively trimmed hedges and bright, blossoming azaleas. In the driveway circle, there was a large iron sculpture, Bolero's Madonna and Child. Fiction must be good. Raleigh let out a whistle. I stepped up to the front door. We had made an appointment through Jenks's personal assistant to meet him at noon. I had been warned by Sam Roth not to come on too hard. A pleasant housekeeper greeted us at the door and took us back to a spacious sunroom, informing us that Mr. Jenks would be down in a short while. The lavish room seemed straight out of some designer magazine with rich jacquard wallpaper, oriental chairs, a mahogany coffee table, shelves of mementos and photographs. It opened onto a fieldstone patio overlooking the Pacific. I had lived in San Francisco all my life, but never knew you could come home every night to this kind of spectacular view. Never knew you could every night to this kind of all mild spectacular view. Priscilla. While we waited, I examined photos arranged on a side table. Jenks with a series of well-known faces. Michael Douglas, the top guy from Disney. Bill Walsh from the 40 Miniers. Others were with an attractive woman I took to be his new wife, Sunny. Smiling. Strawberry blonde hair in various exotic locations. Beaches, skiing. A Mediterranean isle. In a silver frame. There was a 4x6 of the two of them in the center of an enormous lit-up rotunda, the dome of the Palace of Fine Arts. It was a wedding photo. It was then that Nicholas Jenks walked in. I recognized him immediately from his photographs. He was slighter than I had imagined, trim, well-built, no more than 5'10", wearing an open white dress shirt over well-worn jeans. My eyes were drawn immediately to the reddish, gray-flecked beard. Red beard. It's good to meet you, finally. Sorry to put you off, inspectors, he said with an easy smile. But I'm afraid I get cranky if I can't get my morning pages in. He held out his hand, noticing the photograph I was still holding. A bit like the set of Marriage of Figaro, wasn't it? Myself. I would have gone for a small civil ceremony, but Chessie said if she could snare me in a tux, she'd never, ever doubt my commitment to her. I wasn't interested in being charmed by this man, but he was handsome and immediately in control. I could see what some women found attractive about him. He motioned us to the couch. We were hoping, I said, to ask you a few questions about the bride and groom killings. My assistant advised me, crazy, terrible, but these acts, so incredibly desperate, cry out for at least a small measure of sympathy. For the victims, I said, placing his wedding photograph back on the table. Everyone always goes to the plight of the victims, Jenks said, but it's what's inside the killer's head that puts cash in the account. Most people figure these acts are simply about revenge. The sickest kind of revenge, or even subjugation, like most rapes, but I'm not so sure. What's your theory, Mr. Jenks? Chris asked. He made it sound as if he were a fan. Jenks held out a pitcher of iced tea. Something to drink. I know it's a hot one, though I've been holed up in the study since 8. We shook our heads. I took a manila folder out of my bag and placed it on my lap. I remembered Cheery's admonition. Keep it light. Jenks is a VI or not. Nicholas Jenks poured himself a tall glass of tea and went on. From what I've read, these killings appear to be a form of rape of innocence. The killer is acting in a way that no one can forgive, in the most sacred setting of our society. To me, these killings are the ultimate act of purification. Unfortunately, Mr. Jenks, I said, ignoring his bullshit, we didn't come up here seeking your professional advice. I have some questions related to these killings we'd like to run by you. Jenks sat back in his chair. He looked surprised. You make that sound awfully official. That's entirely up to you, I said. I took out a portable cassette tape player from my bag. You mind if I turn this on? He stared at me, his eyes shifting suspiciously. Then he waved his hand as if it were of no concern. So where I'd like to start, Mr. Jenks, is these killings. Do you have any specific knowledge of any of the crimes other than what you've read in the papers? Knowledge. Jenks took a breath, nominally reflecting. Then he shook his head. No, none at all. You read there was a third killing last week in Cleveland. I did see that. I read 5 or 6 papers every day. And did you also read who the victims were? From Seattle, weren't they? One of them, I remember, was some kind of concert promoter. The groom, I nodded. James Patterson. The bride actually lived for a while in town here. Her maiden name was Kathy Coggott. Do either of those names mean anything to you? No? Should they? So you never met either of them. Any interest you had in this case was just like anyone's. Morbid curiosity. He fixed his eyes on me. That's right. Morbid curiosity's my business. I opened my manila folder and took out the top photo. He was playing us, just as he had been playing us by leaving dead-ending clues along the way. I slid the photo across the table. This might sharpen your memory, I said. That's Kathy Coggott, the bride who was murdered the other night. The man next to her, I believe, is you. Chapter 76. Slowly, Beard picked up the photo and stared at it. It is me, he declared, but the lady, though quite beautiful, I don't recognize. If I can ask, where's this picture from? The San Francisco opening of Crosswire. Ah, he sighed, as if that classified something for him. I watched the gears in his brain start to shift for the right response. He was definitely smart, and a pretty good actor. I meet a lot of people at these events. It's why I try to avoid them. You say this was that girl who was killed in Cleveland. We were hoping this was someone you might have remembered, I replied. Jenks shook his head. Too many fans, not much appetite to meet them. Even the really pretty ones, Inspector. The price of fame, I imagine. I took the photo back, thumbed it for a moment, then slid it back in front of him. Nevertheless, I have to come back to this particular fan. I'm curious why she doesn't stick out for you from all those other fans. I withdrew a copy of a Northwest Bell phone bill from my folder and handed it to him. On it were several highlighted calls. This is your private number. Jenks held the copy of the bill. His eyes dimmed. It is. She called you, Mr. Jenks, 3 times in just the past few weeks. Once, here. I circled it for you. For 12 minutes, only last week, 3 days before she was married, then killed. Jenks blinked. Then he picked up the photo again. This time he was different, somber, apologetic. Truth is, Inspector, he took a breath and said, I was so sorry to hear what had taken place. She seemed, in the last month, so full of anticipation. Hope. I was wrong to mislead you. It was foolish. I did know Kathy. I met her the night of the photo there. Sometimes, my fans are rather impressionable and attractive. At times I, to my detriment, can be an impressionable man. I wanted to lunge across the table and rip Nicholas Jenks's impressionable face off. I was certain he was responsible for 6 vicious murders. Now he was mocking us, and the victims. God him. So you're admitting, Raleigh interjected, that you did have a relationship with this woman, not in the way you're insinuating, Jenks replied. Kathy was a woman who hoped to satisfy her own vague artistic aspirations through an association with someone engaged in the act of creating. She wanted to write herself. It's not exactly brain surgery, but I guess if it was so damn easy, we'd all have a book on the bestseller list. On the wit, where we all out the best sell. A brain cells. Of surgical absurd. As never Neither of us responded. We spoke, maybe met, a few times over a few years. It never went beyond that. That's the truth. Sort of mentoring, Raleigh suggested. Yes, that's right. Good choice of words. By any chance, I leaned forward, no longer able to control my tone. Were you mentoring Kathy in Cleveland last Saturday, the night she was killed? Jenks's face turned granite. Like, that's ridiculous. What an inappropriate thing to say. I reached into the folder one more time, this time taking out a copy of the security photo of the killer arriving at the Hall of Fame. This is a security photo from the night she was killed. Is that you, Mr. Jenks? Jenks didn't even blink. It might be, Inspector, if I had been there, which I categorically was not. Where were you last Saturday night? Just so I understand, he said, stonily. Are you suggesting I'm a suspect in these crimes? Kathy Coggott talked. Mr. Jenks. I glared at him. To her sister, to her friends. We know how you treated her. We know she left the Bay Area to try to get away from your domination. We know things were going on between you right up to the wedding night. I wouldn't take my eyes off Jenks. There was nothing in the room but him and me. I wasn't in Cleveland, he said. I was right here that night. I ran the whole body of evidence by him, from the bottle of clothes Du Mesnil left behind at the Hyatt, to his involvement in the real estate trust that owned Sparrow Ridge Vineyards, to the fact that 2 of the murders had been committed with 9mm guns, and according to the state, he owned one. He laughed at me. This is not what you're basing your assumptions on. I hope. I got that champagne ages ago. He shrugged. I don't even recall where it is. You can locate it, I assume, Raleigh asked, then explained that it was a sign of respect that we were asking him to turn it over voluntarily. Would you mind supplying us with a hair sample from your beard? I asked. What? His eyes met mine with a churlish defiance. I imagined the look Melanie Brandt might have seen as he attacked her, what Kathy Cobbett saw as he raised his gun to her head. I think, Nicholas Jenks finally answered, that this fascinating interview has come to an end. He held out his wrists. Unless you're intent on taking me away. My lunch is waiting. I nodded. We'll need to follow up on your whereabouts, and on the gun, of course, Jenks said, standing up, and should you need any further cooperation, feel free to request it through my attorney. I assembled the photographs and put them back into the folder. Raleigh and I got up. At that moment, the attractive strawberry blonde from the photographs walked into the room. She was undeniably pretty, with gentle aquamarine eyes, a pale complexion, long, free-flowing hair. She had a tall dancer's body, and was dressed in thigh-length leggings and a Nike t-shirt. Jessie, Jenks exclaimed. These are officers from the San Francisco Police Department. My wife, inspectors. Sorry, Nikki. Jessie, Jenks apologized. Susan's coming over. I didn't know you had guests. They were just leaving. We nodded stiffly. Moved toward the door. If you could locate what we talked about, I said to him. We'll send someone by to pick it up." He gazed right through me. I hated to leave without taking him in, and to have treated him with kid gloves, but we were still a few steps away from an arrest. "So?" Jessie Jenks smiled and said, "Has my husband finally gone homicidal?" She went up to Jenks, clasped his arm in a teasing way. "I always told him, with those creepy crawler characters he writes about, it was inevitable." Could she know? I wondered. She lived with him, slept with him. How could she not be aware of what was going on inside his head? "I truly hope not, Ms. Jenks," was all I said. Chapter 77. What did she mean by that? Jessie Jenks asked her husband, confused, after the police inspectors left the house. Jenks brushed her away. He paced over to the large French doors leading out to the Pacific. "Idiots," he muttered. "Amateurs. Who the hell do they think they are dealing with?" He felt a prickly, stabbing heat racing over his shoulders and back. They were stupid, tiny-minded beetles. That's why they were cops. If they had any brains, they'd be doing what he was doing, living high over the Pacific. That's why they dig landfills, he replied distractedly. A place for cops to feel at home. Jessie picked up the wedding photo from the coffee table and set it back in its rightful spot. "What did you do now, Nick? Why did she always drive him to this? Why did she always need to know?" She came over, looked at him with those lucid, patient eyes. As always, his anger leaped up in a flash. He didn't even realize he had hit her. It was just that suddenly his hand hurt, and Jessie was sprawled on the floor, and the bamboo table on which the pictures were had toppled over, and she was holding her mouth. He shouted, "Don't you know when to keep away from me? What do you need, a road map?" Nick," Jessie said. "Not here. Not now. Not here." What? He was shouting. He knew he was shouting, losing control, that the staff might hear. "Please, Nick," Jessie said, pulling herself off the floor. "Susan will be here soon. We're going to lunch." It was the notion that Jessie thought she could just sit there and judge him that really set him off. Didn't she see who she really was? Just some blonde with freckles he had picked out of a cattle call and turned into God's gift to Martha Stewart. He grabbed her by the arm and put his face inches from her beautiful, terrified eyes. "Say it." The arm he held was trembling. A tiny stream of mucus ran out of her nose. "Jesus, Nick." That's what he liked. Her fear of him, even though she never showed it in public. "I said say it, Jessie." He twisted her arm behind her back. She was breathing heavily now, sweat forming under her t-shirt. Her little tits poked through when she glared back at him with her paltry defiance. He twisted harder, digging his fingers into her arm. He shoved her toward the bedroom, her bare feet stumbling along. In the bedroom he kicked the door shut. Who did the lead cop think she was? Coming in here, accusing him like that, in her cheap Gap ensemble. What a fucking insolent bitch. He dragged Jessie into the clothes closet. Hers. It was dark in there. Only the dark in her sobs and the pervasive smell of her perfume. He pushed her forward against the wall, rubbed himself against her buttocks. He pulled Jessie's gym shorts down, her panties along with them. "Please," she cried. "Nicky." He found the familiar place where her small cheeks parted. He was very hard, and he pushed himself in deep. He was driving himself inside Jessie. "Say it," he gasped. "You know how to make it stop. Say it, rough," she finally murmured in a tiny whisper. Now she was loving it, as she always did. It wasn't bad, it was good. They all ended up wanting and loving it. He always picked them so well. "Rough," she whimpered. "Rough, rough. Is that what you want, Nick?" Yes. That was part of what he needed. It was all he expected from Jessie. "You love it, Jessie," he whispered back. "That's why you're here." Chapter 78. We kept a close watch on Jenks's movements with a surveillance team of 3 cars. If he made a move to dump the gun, we'd know. If he moved to kill again, we hoped we could stop him. No matter how clever he was, I didn't see how he could execute another murder right now. I wanted to speak with someone who knew him, who might be willing to talk. Raleigh had mentioned an ex-wife, a history of violence between them. I needed to talk with her. It wasn't hard to track down Joanna Jenks, now Joanna Wade. A search through the police files had her maiden name listed as part of the domestic complaint she had filed against her husband years before. A Joanna Wade was currently residing at 1115 Filbert Street on Russian Hill. It was an attractive limestone townhouse on the steepest part of the hill. I buzzed, identified myself to the housekeeper who answered. She informed Ms. Wade was not at home. Exercising, she said. Gold's Gym, on Union. I found the gym around the corner between a Starbucks and an Alfredson's Market. At reception, a buffed, ponytailed staffer informed me that Joanna was in exercise room C. When I asked what Joanna Wade looked like, the staffer laughed. Think blonde and kick-ass fit. I wandered in, and through a large observation window, spotted a TACBO class in exercise room C. About 8 women sweating in lycra and jog bras were kicking their legs out karate style to loud music. I knew that TACBO was the latest exercise craze, the biggest burn. Any one of these women looked as if she could take a resisting suspect up against a wall, then beat the patrol car back to the precinct with breath to spare. The only blonde was in front, trim, sculpted, pushing herself hard and barely breaking a sweat. It was her class. I hung around until she finished up and most of the class had rushed out. She toweled the sweat off her face. Great workout, I said, as she headed my way. The best in the Bay Area. Looking to sign up? Maybe. First I thought I could ask you a couple of questions. Try Diane up front. She can tell you the whole deal. I wasn't talking TACBO. I flashed her my badge. I'm talking Nicholas Jenks. Joanna stared at me, flapping her blonde ponytail off her shoulders to cool her neck. She smirked. What'd he do? Get caught shoplifting one of his books out of Stacy's downtown. Can we talk? I asked. She shrugged and led me over to a changing area that was unoccupied. So what could I tell you about Nip that you couldn't find out from one of his jacket flaps? I know it was several years ago, I said, but you once filed a domestic complaint against him. Listen, in case the paperwork didn't catch up. I dropped the charge back then. I could see the terror of the moment exploding all over again for her. Look, I said genuinely, no one's trying to dig up old wounds. Ms. Wade, I'd just like a read on your ex-husband. Up to his old tricks again. I could see her sizing me up. Was I an ally or a foe? Then she let out a capitulating breath and looked right at me. If you're here about Chessie, I could have warned her. If he hadn't been such a creep about how he dumped me. How did he put it? I right through her, Joe. She inspires me. You ever read his books? Inspector, she asked. She didn't have to inspire him by holding a job down while he went off and found himself. Did she? She didn't have to read his drafts, deal with his rages when he got rejected, tell him every night how much she believed in him. You know where he met her? In the makeup room at entertainment tonight. What I'm asking, Ms. Way I said, is how violent is Nicholas Jenks? She paused, looked away. When she turned back, her eyes had filled up as if she were about to cry. You know you come in here after all this time and make me go through this again. What do you want me to say? That his mother didn't love him? That he's a screwed up, dangerous man? He's holding something in and God only knows when it's going to come out. I would ask myself, Wyatt, what had I done? I was just a kid. Her eyes glistened. I'm sorry. I truly felt for her, for both Mrs. Jenkses. I couldn't even imagine what it was like to wake up and find myself married to someone like him. I need to ask, I said, what are the chances things with your ex-husband have intensified, become more serious? She looked stunned. Is Chessie all right, Inspector? Chessie's all right, I nodded, making it clear I felt there were others who might not be. She waited for me to blink. When I didn't, she gave me a mirthless laugh. So I guess we're talking a lot deeper than pilfering a book from Stacy's bookstore. I nodded again. Woman to woman now, I said. I need to ask you a crucial question. Wade. Chapter 79. What I asked Joanna Wade was whether Nicholas Jenks was capable of murder. I couldn't tell her the reason, but it didn't matter. Joanna was a quick study. I saw the shock in her eyes. After she calmed, I watched her go through a thoughtful evaluation. Finally, she looked at me and asked again, "Have you ever read his books, Inspector? One Fatal Charm. Tough book. He lives with those characters, Inspector. Sometimes I think he forgets it's only what he does for a living." I saw the self-judging look in her eyes. I leaned in closer. "I don't mean to hurt you, but I have to know. Could he kill? Is he capable of murder? I know he's capable of completely debasing another human being. That's murder, isn't it? He's what they call a sexual sadist. His father used to beat his mother in their bedroom closet as an aphrodisiac. He preys on weakness. Yes, the famous Nicholas Jenks humiliated me, but let me tell you the worst thing. The very worst. He left me, Inspector. I didn't leave him." Joanna leaned back and gave me sort of a compassionate smile. "I've seen Chessie around a few times. Luncheons, benefits. We've even spoken a bit. He hasn't changed. She knows I know exactly what she's going through, but it's something we can't share. I see the fear. I know how it is. When she looks in the mirror, she no longer recognizes the person she once was." My blood was at the boiling point. Through the tough veneer, I saw a glimpse of the woman Joanna Wade had been young, needing, confused. I reached out and touched her hand. I had my answer. I closed my pad, ready to get up, when Joanna surprised me. I thought it was him. Not really, but I thought of Nick when I heard about those terrible crimes. I thought about his book, and I said, it could be him. I stopped Joanna. "What book?" "That first thing he wrote, Always a Bridesmaid. I figured that's what brought you here, what connected him to the murders." I stared at her, confused. "Just what are you talking about? I barely remember it. He wrote it before we met. I was lucky enough to come in for the second unpublished one, which I'm told he recently sold for $2 million. But this book I'd totally forgotten about until recently. It was about a student in law school who discovers his wife with his best friend. He kills them both, ends up going on a rampage." "What kind of rampage?" I asked. What she said next made me gasp. "He goes around killing brides and grooms. A lot like what happened." Chapter 80. That was the piece of the puzzle I needed. If Jenks had premeditated these crimes, mapped them out in some early book, it would constitute unimpeachable knowledge, no longer circumstantial. With everything else we had, I could definitely bring him in. "Where can I find this book?" I asked. "It wasn't very good," Joanna Wade replied. "Never published." Every nerve in my body was standing on end. "Do you have a copy?" "Trust me, if I did I would have burned it years ago. Nick had this agent in town, Greg Marks. He dumped him when he got successful. If anyone would have it, it might be him." I called Greg Marks from the car. I was really humming now. I loved this. The operator connected me, and after 4 rings, an answering tape came on. "You've reached Greg Marks Associates." I cringed with disappointment. Damn. Reluctantly, I left him my pager number. "A matter of great urgency," I said. I was about to tell him why I was calling when a voice cut in on the tape. "This is Greg Marks." I explained I needed to see him immediately. His office wasn't too far. Could be there in 10 minutes. "I have an engagement at One Market at 6:15. The agent replied curtly. "But if you can get here, you just stay right there," I told him. "This is police business and it's important. If you leave, I'll arrest you." Greg Marks worked out of his brownstone, a 3rd-floor loft in Pacific Heights with a partial view of the bridge. He answered the door with a suspicious reserve. He was short, balding, smartly dressed, a jacquard shirt buttoned to the top. "I'm afraid you haven't picked a popular topic with me, Inspector. Nicholas Jenks hasn't been a client for over 6 years. He left me the day Crosswire hit the Chronicle's bestseller list. Are you still in touch?" I wanted to make sure anything I asked him wouldn't get back to Jenks. "Why?" "To remind him how I babysat him through the years when he could barely use a noun with an adjective. How I took his obsessed midnight calls, stroked that gigantic ego, I'm here about something Jenks wrote early on, I interrupted. Before any big deals. I spoke to his ex-wife, Joanna, Marks exclaimed with surprise. She said he had written a book that never got published. She thought it was called Always a Bridesmaid. The agent nodded. It was an uneven first effort. No real narrative power. Truth is, I never even sent it out. Do you have a copy? Packed it back to him as soon as I turned the final page. I would think Jenks must. He thought the book was a suspense masterpiece. I was hoping I wouldn't have to go through him, I said, without conveying the basis of my interest. I leaned forward. How do I get my hands on a copy of that novel without going to Jenks directly? Joanna didn't save it. Marks rubbed a finger across his temple. Jenks was always paranoid about people ripping him off. Maybe he had it copyrighted. You check into that. I needed to run this by someone. I needed to run it by the girls. Do you want to hear something really scary about Jenks? The agent said then. Please, go ahead. Here's the idea for a book he always wanted to write. It's about a novelist who is obsessed the kind of thing Stephen King does so well in order to write a better book. A great book. He actually murders people to see what it's like. Welcome to the horrible mind of Nicholas Jenks. Chapter 81. This was why I had become a homicide detective. I rushed back to the office, my head whirling with how to get my hands on this lost book. When the next bombshell hit, it was McBride. Are you sitting? He asked, as if he were about to deliver the coup de grace. Nicholas Jenks was here in Cleveland, the night of the Hall of Fame murders. The son of a bitch was here. Jenks had lied right to my face. He hadn't even blinked. It was now clear. The unidentifiable man at the Hall of Fame had been him after all. He had no alibi. McBride explained how his man had scoured the local hotels. Finally, they uncovered that Jenks had been at the Westin. And amazingly, he had registered under his own name. A desk clerk working there that night remembered him. She knew it the minute she saw Jenks. She was a fan. My mind raced with the ramifications. This was all McBride needed. They had a prior relationship with the victim, a possible sighting at the scene. Now Jenks was placed in his town. He had even lied under questioning. Tomorrow I'm going to the district attorney for an indictment, McBride announced. As soon as we have it, I want you to pick Nicholas Jenks up. The truth hit me like a sledgehammer. We could lose him to Cleveland. All the evidence, all those right hunches, wouldn't help us. Now we might only be able to tag on a concurrent life sentence at a second trial. The Brants and the Wiles, the DeGeorges and the Passanos would be crushed. Mercer would go ballistic. I was left with an absolutely demoralizing choice. Either pick Jenks up and hold him for McBride, or make our move now with less than an airtight case. I should run this up the ladder. The voice sounded in my head, but the voice in my heart said run it by the girls. Chapter 82. I got them together on an hour's notice. Cleveland's ready to indict, I told them. Then I dropped the bombshell about the book Always a Bridesmaid. You've got to find it, Jill declared. It's the one link we can tie into all three crimes, given that it was unpublished. It's as good as exclusive knowledge of the killings. It might even parallel the actual crimes. You find that book, Lindsay, we put Jenks behind bars, forever. How? Joanna Wade mentioned a prior agent, and I went to see him. No. He said check out the Office of Copyrights. Where is that? Cindy shook her head. Washington, I think. That'll take days or more. We don't have days. I turned to Jill. Maybe it's time for a search warrant. Blowing on Jenks. We need the gun and the book, and we need them now. We do that? Jill said nervously. We might bungle this whole investigation. Anyone know about this yet? She asked. I shook my head. Just the first team, you guys. But when Mercer finds out, he'll want to jump in with everything he has. Cameras, microphones, the FBI waiting in the wings. If we're wrong, Jenks will sue our ass, Jill said. I don't even want to think about it. And Cleveland will be waiting, said Claire. Make us look like a bunch of fools. Finally, Jill sighed. All right, I'm with you, Lindsay. If you can think of another way, I looked at all three of them to make certain we were unanimous. Suddenly, Cindy burst in. Can you give me another 24 hours? I looked at her. I don't know. Why? Just until tomorrow. And I need James's social security number. I shook my head. You heard what I said about McBride. Anyway, for what? She had that same look as the other night, when she burst into my apartment holding the photo of Jenks and Kathy Cobbett, the third bride. Just give me until tomorrow morning. Then she got up and left. Chapter 83. The following morning, Cindy sheepishly pushed open the glass doors leading to the office of the San Francisco Writers Guild. This felt a lot like the day at the Grand Hyatt. At the reception desk, a middle-aged woman with the punctilious look of a librarian looked up at her. May I help you? Cindy took in a deep breath. I need to find a manuscript. It was written quite a while ago. The word copyright had set her off. She had written short stories in college. They were barely good enough to get into the school's literary journal. But her mother had insisted. Get them copyrighted. When she investigated, it turned out it took months and was way too costly. But a friend who had published told her about another way she could register documents locally. He told her, all the writers do. If Nicholas Jenks had wanted to protect himself in his salad days, he might have gone the same route. It's sort of a family thing, Cindy told the woman. My brother wrote this history, going back 3 generations. We don't have a copy. The woman shook her head. This isn't the library, Honorable. I'm afraid that whatever we have here is restricted. If you want to find it, you'll have to have your brother come in. I can't, Cindy said solemnly. Nick is dead. The woman softened, looked at her slightly less officiously. I'm sorry. His wife said she can locate a copy. I'd like to give it to our dad, a 60th birthday present. She felt guilty, foolish, lying through her teeth like this. But everything was riding on getting this book. There's a process for all of this, the woman replied sanctimoniously. Death certificate, proof of next of kin. The family lawyer should be able to help you. I just can't go letting you in here. Cindy's mind raced. This wasn't exactly Microsoft here. If she had found her way to the crime scene at the Grand Hyatt, tracked Lindsay to the second crime, she ought to be able to handle this. Everyone was counting on her. There must be a way you can let me take a look. Please. I'm afraid not, dear. Not without some documentation. What makes you even think it's registered with us? My sister-in-law is sure it is. Well, I can't just go giving out registered documents on someone's hunch, she said with finality. Maybe you can at least look it up, Cindy proposed, to see if it's even here. The Dachshund-nosed defender of the free press finally relaxed. I guess I can do that. You say it was several years ago. Cindy felt an adrenaline surge. Yes, and the name. I think it was called Always a Bridesmaid. She felt a chill just saying the words. I meant the name of the author, please. Jenks, Cindy said, holding her breath. Nicholas Jenks. The woman peered at her. The mystery writer. Cindy shook her head, faked a smile. The insurance salesman, she said as calmly as she could. The woman gave her a strange look but continued to punch in the name. You have proof of relationship. Cindy handed her a piece of paper with Jenks's social security number on it. This should be on his registration. That won't do, the woman said. Cindy fumbled through a zipper in her knapsack. She felt the moments slipping away. At least tell me if it's here. I'll come back later with whatever you want. Jenks, the woman muttered skeptically. Looks like your brother was a bit more prolific than you thought. He's got 3 manuscripts registered here. Cindy wanted to let out a shout. The only one I'm looking for is called Always a Bridesmaid. It took what seemed like several minutes, but the stony resistance on the woman's face finally weakened. I don't know why I'm doing this, but if you can verify your story, there seems to be a record of that manuscript's being here. Cindy felt a surge of validation. The manuscript was the final piece they needed to crack a murder case and put away Jenks. Now she just had to get it out. Chapter 84. I found it, exclaimed Cindy, her voice breathless on the phone. Always a Bridesmaid. I pounded my desk in elation. This meant we could definitely make our move. So what does it say, Cindy? I found it, Cindy clarified. I just don't actually have it. She told me about the Writers Guild. The book was there, but it would take a little coaxing to actually get it into our hands. It took barely 2 hours, starting with a frantic call to Jill. She had a judge pulled out of chambers, and we had our court order mandating the release of Jenks's manuscript. Always a bridesmaid. Then Jill and I ran down to meet Cindy. On the way, I made one more call to Claire. It seemed fitting that all of us should be there. 20 minutes later, Jill and I met Cindy and Claire in front of a drab building on Geary where the Writers Guild maintained its offices. Together, we rode to the 8th floor. I'm back, announced Cindy to a surprised woman behind the reception desk, and I brought my documentation. She eyed us suspiciously. Who are these cousins? I flashed the clerk my badge and also presented the officially stamped search warrant. What's going on with this book? The woman gasped, clearly out of her authority. She went inside and came back with a supervisor, who read over the court order. We usually only hold them for up to 8 years, he said with some uncertainty. Then he disappeared for what seemed a lifetime. We all sat there in the stark reception area like pacing relatives, waiting for a baby to be born. What if it had been thrown out? Finally, the supervisor came out with a dusty bundle wrapped in brown paper. In the back of the bins, he announced with a self-satisfied smile. There was a coffee shop right down the street. We took a table in back and crowded around with anticipation. I plopped the manuscript down on the table, peeled off the brown paper wrapping. I read the cover. Always a Bridesmaid, a novel by Nicholas Jenks. Nervously, I opened it and read the first page. The narrator was reflecting on his crimes from jail. His name was Philip Campbell. What is the worst thing, the novel began, anyone has ever done? Chapter 85. We split up the book into 4 sections. We each paged silently, searching for some scene or detail that would parallel the real-life crimes. Mine was about this guy's life. Philip Campbell, his picture-perfect wife, catching her with another man. He killed them both and his life changed forever. Bingo. Jill spoke up suddenly. She read out loud, bending back the sheaf of paper like a deck of cards. She described a scene with Philip Campbell, breath pounding inside, voices ringing in his head, stealing through the halls of a hotel, the Grand Hyatt, a bride and groom in a suite. Campbell breaks in on them. He kills them without a second thought, in a single act. Jill read from the manuscript. He had washed away the stench of betrayal and replaced it with a fresh, heretofore unimagined desire. He liked to kill. Our eyes locked. This was beyond creepy. Jenks was crazy, but was he also crafty? Claire was next. It was another wedding, this time outside a church. The bride and groom coming down the steps, rice being thrown, shouts of congratulations, applause. The same man, Philip Campbell, at the wheel of the limo that will take them away. We looked at one another, stunned. It was how the second murders were committed. Jill murmured, "Holy shit." Claire just shook her head. She looked sad and shocked. I guess we all were. A long suppressed cry of satisfaction built up in my chest. We had done it. We had solved the bride and groom murders. I wonder how it ends, Cindy mused, fanning to the end of the book. How else? Said Jill, with an arrest. Chapter 86. I rode up to Jenks's house with Chris Raleigh. We barely spoke, both of us brimming with anticipation. Outside, we were met by Charlie Clapper and his CSU team. They would grid search the house and grounds as soon as we took Jensen. We rang the bell. Each second I waited, my heart pounded harder. Every reason I became a cop was grinding in my chest. This was it. The door opened, and the same housekeeper answered. This time, her eyes went wide as she took in the convergence of blue and whites outside. I flashed my badge. We need to see Mr. Jenks. We made our way back toward the sitting room where we had met Jenks only the day before. A startled Chessie Jenks met us in the hall. Inspector, she gasped, recognizing me. What's going on? What are all those police cars doing out front? I'm sorry, I said, meeting her eyes. I was sorry for her. Is your husband at home, Nick? She cried, realizing in a panic why we had come. Then she ran along with us, trying to block me, shouting, "You can't just come in here like this. This is our home. Please, Mrs. Jenks," Raleigh implored. I was too wound up to stop. I wanted Nicholas Jenks so bad it hurt. A second later he appeared, coming in from the back lawn overlooking the Pacific. He was holding a golf club. "I thought I told you," he said, looking perfectly unruffled in his white shirt and linen shorts. "The next time you need something from me, you should contact my lawyer." "You can tell him yourself," I said. My heart was racing. "Nicholas Jenks, you are under arrest for the murders of David and Melanie Brandt, Michael and Rebecca DeGeorge, James and Kathleen Voskuhl." I wanted him to hear every name, to bring to mind every one of them he'd killed. I wanted to see the callous indifference crack in his eyes. "This is insane." Jenks glared at me. His gray eyes burned with intensity. "Nick," cried his wife, "what are they talking about? Why are they here in our house? Do you know what you're doing?" he asked, the veins bulging on his neck. "I asked you, do you have any idea what you're doing?" I didn't answer, just recited the Miranda warning. "What you're doing," he raged, "is engaging in the biggest mistake of your little life." "What are they saying?" His wife was pale. "Nick, please tell me, what is going on?" "Shut up," Jenks spat out at her. Suddenly, he spun back toward me with a vicious fire in his eyes. He lunged forward with his fist. He swung at me. I cut his feet out from under him. Jenks fell across an end table to the floor, photos falling everywhere, glass shattering. The writer moaned loudly in pain. Jessie Jenks screamed, stood there in a paralyzed state. Chris Raleigh cuffed her husband and dragged him to his feet. "Call Sherman," Jenks shouted at his wife. "Tell him where I am. What's happened?" Raleigh and I pushed Jenks out to our car. He continued to struggle, and I saw no reason to be gentle. "What's your theory on the murders now?" I asked him. Chapter 87. After the last news conference had ended, after the last flashbulb had dimmed, after I had rehashed, for what seemed the 100th time, how we had narrowed in on Jenks, after a beaming Chief Mercer had been chauffeured away, I hugged Claire, Cindy, and Jill. I then passed on a celebratory beer and wandered back to the Hall of Justice. It was well past 8, and only the prattle of the night shift interrupted my being alone. I sat at my desk, in the well-earned silence of the squad room, and tried to remember the last time I felt this good. Tomorrow we would begin meticulously compiling the case against Nicholas Jenks, interrogating him, accumulating more evidence, filling out report after report. But we had done it. We had caught him just as I had hoped we eventually would. I had fulfilled the promise I made to Melanie Brandt that horrible night in the Mandarin suite at the Grand Hyatt. I felt proud of myself. Whatever happened with Negley's, even if I never made lieutenant, no one could take this away. I got up, stepped over to the freestanding blackboard that listed the cases we were working on. Under open cases, somewhere near the top, was her name, Melanie Brandt. I took the eraser and rubbed her name, then her husband's, until they disappeared, until the blue smear of chalk was no more. "I bet you that feels good," Raleigh's voice sounded behind me. I turned. He was there, looking smug. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "So late. Thought I'd straighten up Roth's desk. Steal a few brownie points," he said. "What do you think, Lindsay? I came to find you." We were in a corner of the squad room, and there was no one around. He never had to move. I went to him. Nothing in the way. No reason to deny this. I kissed him, not like before, not just to let Chris know I was interested. I kissed him the way I had wanted him to kiss me that night in Cleveland. I wanted to steal the breath right out of him. I wanted to say, "I wanted to do this from the first time I saw you." When we finally pulled apart, he repeated with a smile. I said, "I bet that feels good." It did feel good. Right now, it all felt good. It also felt unavoidable. "What are your plans?" I smiled at him. How loosely are we talking? Specifically, right now, tonight, the next several hours at least. I thought I would come back, straighten Cherry's desk, and see if you wanted me to take you home. Let me get my purse. Chapter 88. I don't know how we got all the way to my apartment in the Potrero. I don't know how Chris and I talked and drove and ignored what was tearing at us inside. Once we got through my door, there was no stopping it. I was all over Chris. He was all over me. We only got as far as the rug in the foyer, kissing, touching, fumbling for buttons and zippers, breathing loudly. I had forgot how good it was to be held, to be desired by somebody I wanted, too. Once we touched, we knew enough to take our time. We both wanted it to last. Chris had what I needed more than anything else: soft hands. I loved kissing him, loved his touch, his gentleness, then his roughness. The simple fact that he was concerned about my pleasure as much as his own. You never know until you try it out, but I loved being with Chris. I absolutely loved it. I know it's a cliche, but that night I made love as if it might never happen again. I felt Chris's current, warming me, electrifying from my womb to my thighs to the tips of my fingers and my toes. His grasp was all that held me together, kept me from breaking apart. I felt a trust for him that was unquestioning. I held nothing back. I gave myself to Chris in a way I never had to anyone before. Not only with my body and my heart. These were things I could pull back. I gave him my hope that I could still live. When I cried out, tremors exploding inside me, my fingers and toes stiff with joy, a voice inside me whispered what I knew was true. I gave him everything. He gave it back. Finally, Chris pulled off me. We were both tingling, still on fire. What? I gasped for breath. Now what? He looked at me and smiled. I want to see the bedroom. Chapter 89. A cool breeze was blowing in my face. Oh God, what a night, what a day, what a roller coaster. I sat wrapped in a quilt out on my terrace, overlooking the south end of the bay, nothing moving. Only the lights of San Leandro in the distance. It was 1:45. In the bedroom, Chris lay asleep. He'd earned some rest. I couldn't sleep. My body was too alive, tingling, like a distant shore with 1,000 flickering lights. I couldn't help but smile at the thought. It had been a great day. June 27th, I said aloud. I'm gonna remember you. First we find the book, then we arrest Jenks. I never imagined it could go any further, but it had. It went way further. Chris and I had made love that night twice more. The last 3 hours a sweet dance of touching, panting, loving. I didn't want to feel Chris's hands ever leave me. I didn't ever want to miss the heat of his body. It was a new, electrifying sensation. For once I had held nothing back, and that was very, very good. But here, in the dark of the night, an accusing voice needled me. I was lying. I hadn't given it all. There was the one inescapable truth that I was hiding. I hadn't told him about Negley's. I did know how to, just as we had felt such life. How could I tell him I might be dying, that my body, which a moment ago was so alive with passion, was infected? In a single day, it seemed that everything in my life was transformed. I wanted to soar. I deserved it. I deserved to be happy, but he deserved to know. I heard a rustling behind me. It was Chris. What are you doing out here? He asked. He came up behind me, placed his hands on my neck and shoulders. I was hugging my knees, the quilt barely covering my breasts. It's gonna be hard, I said, leaning my head on him, to go back to the way things were. Who said anything about going back? I mean, like partners. Watching you across the room. Tomorrow we have to interrogate Jenks. Big day for both of us. His fingers teased my breasts, then the back of my neck. He was driving me crazy. You don't have to worry, he said. Once the case is made, I'm going back. I'll stick around for the interrogation. Chris, I said, as a chill shot through me, used to him. I told you we weren't going to be partners forever. He bent down, inhaling the smell of my hair. At least not that kind of partners. What kind does that leave? I murmured. My neck was on fire where his hands caressed me. Oh, let this go somewhere, I begged inside. Let this go all the way to the moon. Could I just tell him? It was no longer that I couldn't find a way. It was just, now that we were here, I didn't want it to end. I let him take me into the bedroom. This keeps getting better and better, I whispered. Doesn't it? I can't wait to see what happens next. Chapter 90. I had just got to my desk the following morning. I was flipping the Chronicle to the continuation of Cindy's article on Jenks's arrest when my phone rang. It was Charlie Clapper. His crime scene team had spent most of the night meticulously going over everything in Jenks's house. You make a case for me, Charlie. I was hoping for a murder weapon, maybe even the missing rings. Something solid that would melt Jenks's sneering defiance. The CSU leader let out a weary breath. I think you should come down here and see. I grabbed my purse and the keys to our work car. In the hallway, I ran into Jacoby. Rumors say, he grunted, I'm no longer the man of your dreams. You know you should never believe what you read in the Star, I quipped. Right? Or hear from the night shift. I pulled myself to a stop. Someone had spotted Chris and me last night. My mind flashed through the red-hot copy that was probably running through the office rumor mill. Behind my anger, I knew that I was blushing. Relax, Jacoby said. You know what can happen when you get caught up in a good collar. And it was a good collar. Thank you, Warren, I said. It was one of those rare moments when neither of us had anything to hide. I winked and hit the stairs. Just remember, he called after me. It was the champagne match that got you on your way. I remember. I'm grateful. Thank you, Warren. I drove down 6 to Taylor and California to Jenks's home in Sea Cliff. When I arrived, 2 police cars were blocking the street, keeping a circle of media vans at bay. I found Clapper looking weary and unshaven, catching a brief rest at the dining room table. You find me a murder gun? I asked. Just these. He pointed to a pile of guns and plastic bags on the floor. There were hunting rifles, a showcase Minelli shotgun, a Colt automatic, .45 pistol, no 9mm. I did make a move to examine them. We went through his office. Clapper wheezed. Nothing on any of the victims. No clippings, no trophies. I was hoping you might have come across the missing rings. You want rings? Clapper said. He wearily pushed himself up. His wife's got rings. Plenty of them. I'll let you go through them. But what we did find was this. Follow me. On the floor of the kitchen, with a yellow evidence marker on it, was a crate of wine. Champagne. Croc. Clos du Mesnil. That we already knew, I said. He kept looking at me, as if I had somehow insulted him with the obvious. Then he lifted a bottle out of the open case. Check the numbers, Lindsay. Each bottle's registered with a number. Look here. 423559. Must make it go down all the more smoothly. He took out a folded-up green copy of a police property voucher from his chest pocket. The one from the Hyatt. Same lot, same number. Charlie smiled. The bottles were the same. It was solid evidence that tied Jenks to where David and Melanie Brandt were killed. It wasn't a weapon, but it was damning no longer circumstantial. A rush of excitement shot through me. I high-fived the pale, heavy-set CSU man. Anyway, Charlie said, almost apologetically, I wouldn't have brought you all the way out here for just that. Clapper led me through the finely furnished interior of the house to the master bedroom. It had a vast picture window looking out on the Golden Gate Bridge. He took me into a spacious closet. Jenks's. You remember the bloody jacket we found at the hotel? In the rear of the closet, Charlie squatted over a large shoe rack. Well, now it's a set. Clapper reached behind the shoe rack and pulled out a crumpled Nordstrom's shopping bag. I wanted you to see how we found it. Out of the bag, he pulled balled-up black tuxedo trousers. I already checked. It's the other half of the jacket at the Hyatt. Same maker. Look inside. Same style number. I might as well have been staring at $1 million in cash, or a ton of stolen cocaine. I couldn't take my eyes off the pants, imagining how Nicholas Jenks would squirm now. Claire had been right. She'd been right from the start. The jacket hadn't come off the victim, it had always belonged to Jenks. So what do you think, Inspector? Charlie Clapper grinned. Can you close your case or what? Oh, yeah, the CSU man exclaimed, almost absent-mindedly. Where'd I put it? He patted his pockets, searched around in his jacket. He finally found a small plastic bag. Straight out of the sucker's electric razor, Charlie announced. In the bag were several short red hairs. Chapter 91. Claire said, I've been expecting you, honey. She took my arm and led me back into the lab to a small room lined with chemicals. 2 microscopes were set up side by side on a granite block counter. Charlie told me what he came up with, she said. The champagne, matching pantaloons. You got him, Lindsay. Match these. I held out the plastic bag. We put him in the gas chamber. Okay, let's see, she said, smiling. She opened a yellow envelope marked Priority, Evidence, and took out a Petri dish identical to the one I had seen after the second murders. It had subject Rebecca DeGeorge has 62,340 written on the front in bold marker. With a tweezer, she placed a single hair that had come from the second bride onto a clear slide. Then she inserted it under the scope. She leaned over it, adjusting the focus, then caught me surprised. As King, 30 now, are you leaning? Woman, you mean Nebly's. What else would I mean? She said, peering into the scope. In the rush of apprehending Jenks, it was the first time in the past few days that I had really thought about it. I saw Medley last week. My blood count's still down. Claire finally looked up. I'm sorry, Lindsay. Trying to sound upbeat, I walked her through my regimen, the increased dosage, the higher frequency. I mentioned the possibility of a bone marrow transplant. She flashed me a big smile. We're gonna have to find a way to get those red cells of yours shaken up. Even in the laboratory. I must have started to blush. What? Asked Claire. What are you hiding? Trying unsuccessfully to hide. Nothing. Something's going on between you and Mr. Chris Raleigh, I bet. Come on. This is me you're talking to. You can't pull that blue wall of silence stuff. I told her, from the first kiss at the precinct to the slow, torturous ride home, to the burst of heat right there on the hallway rug. Claire grasped me by my shoulders. Her eyes were as bright and excited as mine. So, I laughed. So, it was awesome. It was, right? I felt a chill of doubt come over me. I just don't know if I'm doing the right thing, considering what's going on. I hesitated. I could love him, Claire. Maybe I already do. We stared at each other. There was much more to say. Well, Ayer's eyes returned tenancy or microscope. Let's see what we have here. Hairs from his chin. 3 hairs from Jenks's razor were set on a cellular slide. She loaded it into a scope. The 2 scopes were side by side. Claire looked first, leaned over as she focused the new one in. Then she went back and forth. Hum, she uttered. I held my breath. What do you think? I asked. You tell me. I leaned in. Immediately, I recognized the first hair, the one from inside Rebecca DeGeorge's vagina. Thick reddish, a white filament, twisted around its base like the coil of a snake. Then I looked at the hairs from Jenks's razor. There were 3 of them, shorter, clipped, but each had that same reddish hue, that same coil of filament around it. I was no expert, but there was no doubt in my mind. The hairs were a perfect match. Chapter 92. Nicholas Jenks was in a holding cell on the 10th floor of the Hall of Justice. He was headed to arraignment later today. His lawyer, Sherman Leff, was with him, looking as if this were all just a formality and the scales of justice were resting on the shoulders of his English-tailored suit. Jill Bernhardt accompanied Raleigh and me. Jenks had no idea what was coming his way. We had the champagne, the tuxedo pants, matching hairs from his beard. We had him in the suite with David and Melanie Brandt. I couldn't wait to tell him all the good news. I sat down across from Jenks and looked him in the eye. This is Assistant District Attorney Jill Bernhardt, I said. She's going to be handling your case. She's going to convict you." He smiled the same gracious, confident, and condescending glint as if he were receiving us in his home. "Why does he look so confident?" I wondered. "If it's all right," Jill said, "I'd like to begin." "Your meeting," Sherman Leff said. "I've no objection." Jill took a breath. "Mr. Jenks, in an hour you are going to be arraigned for the first-degree murder of David and Melanie Brandt at the Grand Hyatt Hotel on June 5th. Shortly after, I believe a Cleveland court will do the same for the murders of James and Kathleen Voskuhl. Based on what the medical examiner has just uncovered, I believe you can expect a Napa Valley court to follow through as well. We have overwhelming evidence linking you to all three of these crimes. We're sharing this with you and with your counsel, in the hope that your response to this evidence might spare the city, the families of the deceased, and your family the further humiliation of a trial." Sherman Leff finally cut in. "Thank you, Miss Bernhardt. As long as consideration is the spirit of the day, we'd like to begin by expressing my client's deep regret for his emotional outburst toward Inspector Boxer at the time of his arrest. As you might imagine, the shock and the suddenness of such an accusation, so totally preposterous after he had fully complied with your questioning in his own home, I'm certain you can understand how the wrong emotions might take hold." "I do deeply regret that, Inspector," Jenks spoke up. "I realize how this must look, my being less than forthcoming about my relationship with one of the deceased. And now you seem to have stumbled upon that unfortunate book," which Leff interjected. "I must advise you, we will be making a motion to suppress. Obtaining it was an unjustified intrusion into my client's private domain." "The warrant was totally justified," Jill said calmly. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that your client gave false testimony concerning his whereabouts when Kathy Voskuhl was killed." Leff hung in mid-motion, stunned. "Your client was in Cleveland, Counselor." I sprang on him. Then I said to Jenks, "You were registered at the Westin. You stayed 2 nights, coinciding with the Voskuhl murders. You said you were at home, Mr. Jenks, but you were there, and you were at the Hall of Fame." Jenks's smile disappeared and his eyes flicked around the room. He swallowed, and I could see the knot sliding down his throat. He was retracing his alibis and lies. He looked at Leff, somewhat apologetically. "I was there," he admitted. "I did conceal it. As it happens, I was in town to address a local readers group. You can check the Argosy bookstore." I didn't know how to explain it. Coupled with knowing Kathy, it seemed so incriminating. "But let me make this clear. You're wrong about the wedding. I was nowhere near it." My blood rose. I couldn't believe this guy. "You had a reading? When, Mr. Jenks?" "Saturday afternoon, at 4. A small group of very loyal fans. The Argosy was very kind to me when I first started out. And after that I did what I always do. I stayed at the hotel and wrote. I took a swim. At an early dinner. You can ask my wife. I always spend the evenings alone when I'm on the road. It's been written up in People magazine." I leaned across the table. "So this was all some bizarre coincidence, right? A woman with whom you've denied having a sexual relationship is brutally murdered. You just happened to be in town. You just happened to lie about the relationship and about being there. Your likeness just happens to be caught by a security camera at the scene. Is that how it goes, Mr. Jenks?" Leff placed a cautionary hand on Jenks's arm. "No," his client snapped, his self-control clearly chipping away. Then he became calmer and wiped the sweat off his brow. "I lied, for Chessie, to preserve my marriage." He straightened himself up in the wooden chair. His alibi was collapsing. "I'm not a perfect man, Inspector. I deceived you about Kathy. It was wrong. The answer is yes. What you assume to be true is true. We were lovers on and off for 5 years. It continued well into her relationship with James. It was folly. It was the desperate thrill of a fool. But it was not murder. I did not kill Kathy, and I did not kill the others." Jenks stood up. For the first time, he looked scared. The reality of what was happening was clearly sinking in. I leaned forward and said, A bottle of champagne was left in the suite at the Hyatt where the Brants were killed. It matched the same lot you purchased at an auction at Butterfield and Butterfield in November 1996. Leff objected. We know that. Surely the unfortunate coincidence of my client's taste in champagne doesn't implicate him in this act. He didn't even know the Brants. That wine could have been purchased anywhere. It could have, yes, however. The registration number on the bottle from the Hyatt matched those from the rest of the lot we uncovered at your home last night. This is getting absurd, Jenks said angrily. This sort of bullshit wouldn't even make one of my books. I pulled out the Nordstrom's shopping bag holding the balled-up tuxedo pants. I tossed them onto the table in front of everybody. You recognize these pants? What kinds of games are we playing now? These were found last night, in this bag, in the back of your bedroom closet. So, what are you saying? They are mine. Joseph Abbott. They could be. I don't understand where you're going. Where I'm going is that these pants match the tuxedo jacket that was found in the Brants' suite. They are a suit, Mr. Jenks. A suit. It's the pants to the jacket you left in their hotel room. Same brand, same style number, same size. A deepening panic began to sweep over his face. And if all this still falls short of your usual material, I said, fixing on his eyes, then how's this? The hair matched. The hair you left inside Becky DeGeorge with hairs taken from your house. It belonged to you. You animal, you convicted yourself. Jill leaned forward. You're going away. Jenks, you're going away until the appeals finally run out, and they come to stick a loaded needle in your arm. This is insane, he cried. He was leaning over me, veins in his neck swelling, shouting in my face. You bitch. You're setting me up. You fucking ice bitch. I didn't kill anyone. Suddenly, I found that I couldn't move. Seeing Jenks unwind was one thing, but there was something else going on. I felt pinned to my chair. I knew, but I couldn't fight it, Neglies. My legs began to buckle. Not here, I begged. Then I felt Raleigh supporting me. Lindsay, you all right? He was looking at me worried, unsuspecting. I saw Jill there too. You all right, Lindsay? I leaned against the wall. I willed my legs to work. I'm okay, I whispered, holding on to Raleigh's arm. I just hate that bastard, I said, and walked out of the interrogation room. I was very weak, swaying. I barely made it to the ladies' room. I felt faint, then nauseated, as if some angry spirit were trying to claw out of my lungs. I closed my eyes and leaned over the sink. I coughed, a raw, burning stinging in my chest. Then I shook and coughed some more. Gradually, I felt the spell recede. I took a breath, opened my eyes. I shuddered. There was blood all over the sink. Chapter 93. 4 hours later, in District Criminal Court, I felt well enough to watch Nicholas Jenks be arraigned for murder. A buzzing crowd filled the halls outside the courtroom of Judge Stephen Bowen. Photographers flashed cameras blindly. Reporters surged for a glimpse of the sullen, shaken best-selling writer. Raleigh and I squeezed through, took a seat behind Jill in the front row. My strength having returned, the riot in my chest subsided. I wanted Jenks to see me there. I saw Cindy, sitting in the press section, and in the back of the courtroom, I spotted Chancellor Weil and his wife. It was over before it began. Jenks was led in, his eyes as dead and hollow as craters on the moon. The clerk read the docket. The suspect rose. The bastard pleaded not guilty. What were they going to argue? That all the evidence was inadmissible. Leff, the consummate showman, was unusually respectful, even demure before Judge Bowen. He made a pleading case for release on recognizance based on Jenks's stature in the community. For a moment, the killer's accomplishments almost even swayed me. Jill fought him head-on. She graphically detailed the savagery of the murders. She argued that the suspect had the means and the lack of roots to flee. I felt a surge of triumph rippling through me when the judge struck his gavel and intoned, "Bail denied." Chapter 94. Now we were celebrating. It was the end of the day, a day I had long waited for, and I met the girls for a drink at Susie's. We had earned this. Nicholas Jenks had been arraigned. No bail, no consideration of the court. The four of us had pulled it off. Here's to the Women's Murder Club. Cindy cheered, with her beer mug in the air. Not bad for a collection of gender-impaired public servants. Claire agreed. What did Jenks call me? I shook my head and smiled. A fucking ice bitch. I can do ice bitch, Jill said, grinning. To the ice bitches of the world, Cindy toasted, and the men who cannot thaw us out. Speak for yourself, said Claire. Edmund thaws me just fine. We all laughed and clinked beers. Still, I said, letting out a deep breath, I'd like to turn up a murder weapon, and I want to nail him to the second crime. When I'm through with him, Jill tugged at her beer and said, you won't have to worry about him serving time for the second crime. You see, Jill chopped down his lawyer's bail request, Cindy said with admiration. You see the look on his face. She made her fingers into a scissors. Snip, 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 straight for the testicles. That man was left standing there in his suit with a 2-inch tip. We all laughed. Cindy's cherubic nose twisted as she said, snip, snip, snip. Still, I said, without a weapon. His motive still needs work. Damn his motive, child, Claire exclaimed. Let well enough alone. Jill agreed. Why can't his motive simply be that he's a sick bastard? He's had a history of sexual sadism for years. He's brutalized 3 women that we know of. I'm sure more will come out as the trial moves on. You saw the bastard, Lindsay, she went on. He's crazed. His little perfect world gets rocked. He goes insane. This morning, he looked like he was about to plant a death grip on your throat. She grinned toward the group. Lindsay just sort of glares up at him like, get the fuck out of my face. They were about to raise a glass to me, the tough hero cop, who would always carry the tag that she was the one who nailed Jenks, when the realization shot through me that I could never have done it without them. It wasn't my steel nerves that had taken over in the interrogation room, but the grip of my disease squeezing my energy. I had kept it concealed, never shared even with the ones who had become my closest friends. That wasn't about Jenks, I said. Sure seemed like it. I don't mean the confrontation. I mean what happened after. I paused, when I almost collapsed. That wasn't about Jenks. They were still smiling, except Claire, but one by one the gravity in my eyes alerted them. I looked around the table and told them about the Pac-Man-like disease that was eating my red blood cells, and that I'd been fighting it for 3 weeks now. Packed red cell transfusions. My blood count was deteriorating. I was getting worse. I started strong, my voice firm because it had been part of my life for several weeks now, but when I finished, I was speaking in a hushed, scared tone. I was blinking back tears. Jill and Cindy just sat there, rocked in disbelieving silence. Then, there were 3 hands reaching out for me. Cindy's, Jill's, then last and warmest, Claire's. For a long time no one said anything. They didn't have to. Finally I smiled, choking back tears. Isn't it just like a cop to go and shut down a party just when it's going good? It broke the tension, cut through the sudden pall. They never said we're with you. They never told me you're gonna be all right. They didn't have to. We're supposed to be celebrating, I said. Then I heard Jill's voice, out of the blue, solemn, confessing. When I was a little girl, I was real sick. I was in a brace in hospitals between the ages of 4 and 7. It broke my parents, their marriage. They split up as soon as I got better. I guess that's why I always felt I had to be stronger and better than anyone else. Why I always had to win. It started in high school, Jill went on. I wasn't sure what she was referring to. I didn't know if I would be good enough. I used to. She unbuttoned the cuffs of her blouse, rolled the sleeves up over her elbows. I've never showed these to anybody except Steve. Her arms were marked with scars. I knew what they were, self-inflicted slashes. Jill had been a cutter. What I meant to say was, you just have to fight it. You fight it, and fight it, and fight it. And every time you feel it getting stronger, you fight it some more. I'm trying, I whispered, my voice choking. I really am trying. Now I knew what propelled her, what was behind that icy gaze. But how? Jill's hands were holding mine. There were tears in both our eyes. It's like with Jenks, Lindsay, she said. You just don't let it win. Chapter 95. In the cold, cramped cell. Nicholas Jenks paced anxiously. He felt as if dynamite were about to explode at the center of his chest. He hadn't done anything. How could they destroy his name? Attack him with those wild fictions? Disgrace him all over the news? It was dark and he was freezing. The cot in his jail cell wasn't fit for a month. He was still in the damp clothes they had brought him in. A cold, unrepentant sweat began to break out on his palms. He'd make the little inspector bitch pay. One way or another, he'd get her in the end. That was a promise. What was his fucking poodle of a lawyer doing? When would Left get him out of there? It was as if all reason had been sucked out of his world. What the hell was going on? Or at least, Philip Campbell thought. That's what Jenks ought to be feeling, what he thought the bastard would be saying in his mind. Campbell sat in front of the mirror. Time for you to go away. Your work is finally done. The last chapter's been written. He dabbed a wet cloth in a bowl of warm water. It was the last time he would ever have to play the part. So how does it feel, Nicholas? He pulled out the pins that held his hair and let his locks shake out. How does it feel to be a victim, a prisoner? To feel the same degradation and shame you cast on others? Slowly, he wiped the dark makeup off his eyes, dabbing with the cloth, feeling the sheen begin to return to his face. How does it feel to be helpless and alone? To be kept in a dark space? To feel betrayed, one by one? Philip Campbell tugged at the hairs of the reddish beard on his chin, until they came out and a new person was revealed. Not able to recognize in the mirror the person you once were, scrubbing the face until it came out clean and smooth, unbuttoning the shirt, Nicholas's shirt, and soon, from underneath the bodysuit, a well-defined woman's body came to life. The outline of breasts, shapely legs, arms rippling with lean strength. She sat there, newly revealed, a bright glow in her eyes. This is rich. How does it feel, Nicholas? To be royally fucked. The tables turned for once. She couldn't restrain the thought that it was fitting and funny that in the end he had been trapped by his own twisted mind. It was more than funny. It was absolutely brilliant. Who's laughing now, Nick? The next and last sequel of this book will be uploaded in the next video. Stay tuned for more of our audiobooks. Thank you for listening to this audiobook. If you like this book, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel for getting more exciting audiobooks on this channel. Disclaimer. Please note that this channel is dedicated to sharing audiobooks for educational and entertainment purposes only. Full credit for the content and intellectual property rights of these audiobooks is given to the respective authors and their publishing houses. This channel does not claim any ownership over the material presented, and is committed to respecting the rights of the authors and publishers. Our goal is to promote literature and reading by providing these audiobooks as a resource for those who might not otherwise have access to them. We encourage our listeners to support the authors and publishers by purchasing the original works.